Well, it looks like Brexit might not be cancelled after all. I discussed a couple days ago that the Parliament in the UK seized power from the current government, and they were able to pass a bill that, ostensibly outlawed a no-deal Brexit, which, pretty much outlawed Brexit entirely since, if you don't have the option of walking away from the table, as I explained, you can't make a deal. So if the UK can't leave without a deal, and they can't make a deal because they have no ground, to negotiate on, they have no leverage over the EU, well, then there's never going to be a deal, and the UK is just going to stay in the EU forever. And I thought that was the end of the story. But apparently, it looks like now that old Boris Johnson is not changing his tune. Bojo has apparently no intention of seeking another extension to get another deal, to make a deal past Halloween night, and that no matter what, whether the law tells him to or not, he's not going to extend Brexit. Brexit is going to happen on Halloween night no matter what, whether there's a deal or whether there's no deal, whether there's a bad deal, whether there's a good deal. Of course, in my opinion, all deals are bad deals, but that's beside the point. The point here is that Boris is, as of yet, not capitulating. Now, Sky News apparently has picked up on a leak from some private meeting that one of Boris's advisors, Duncan Cummings, who you may recognize as sort of the balding man with the hairline back about, I'd say about 2/3 of his head. And he has apparently developed some kind of strategy that he thinks will help the Prime Minister get around this bill. He thinks that there is a legal loophole somewhere to be found, and that the Prime Minister is going to exploit it. So therefore, in doing so, Boris will be able to effectively leave on October the 31st without having made a deal, and without being put in prison by the Parliament. Now, I find it very interesting that there's even a threat now that Boris could be put in prison for disobeying the Parliament, because, at least compared to the American system, that seems very extreme, because here in America, presidents disobey Congress all the time. We have a system of checks and balances in this country, but only the executive branch has the power to execute the law. And so presidents quite frequently will break the law and only enforce the laws that really, they want to enforce, because, if they don't obey Congress, what are they going to do? Arrest themselves? The only thing that, in the U.S. that the Congress can do if a president doesn't carry out their will is really impeach him. And that's something that's rarely used, because, presidents do so much that is against the will of the Congress, or rather that is sort of against, not against the law, but they selectively enforce laws. They don't really enforce everything. And they do that to such an extent to where Congress kind of has to pick their battles, because if they were just going to impeach a president every time they deviated from the law, well, then every president would be impeached, within a month of being in office. But here in the UK, it seems like this is a much more serious matter, and that Boris actually faces the risk of not only being removed from office, as an American president could, but also being thrown in prison for being a dirty common lawbreaker. It's almost like they treat their leaders in the UK, their elected leaders rather, like common citizens, which is not something that, I'm used to. Now, it could be, since I'm not that familiar with British politics, that it is quite common that the Prime Minister disobeys the Parliament when it comes to things that people don't really care that much about, but perhaps just because, Brexit is such an important issue that they are willing to, remove him from office and throw him in prison, if he were to disobey this particular law. I could see a similar thing happening in the U.S. Congress if, let's say, the U.S. was a member of the European Union, and the Congress passed a law essentially saying that the U.S. can't leave the European Union. If the president tried to disobey that, he'd probably get impeached, at least in the House. So anyway, back to Duncan Cummings. Apparently, he thinks, as I said, that there is some legal way around this so that Boris can completely get off scot-free, which I'm sure would be the best-case scenario for the government currently. Now, in the case that is not possible, however, there are some who are already calling for Boris to just break the law anyway for the sake of the country. Because of course once Brexit is done, the UK is not going to be able to just go right back into the European Union. If midnight strikes on October the 31st and there's no deal and no extension, well, Brexit's just going to happen. There's going to be no more Britain in the European Union. And if Boris can just hold out long enough and make sure that actually happens, some of people, I think it was Duncan Smith, essentially was just saying, hey, Boris, take one for the team. Sure, you'll be locked in prison, but you will have, been a hero, which, I certainly think that'd be the case. If I were in Boris's position, I don't know about him personally, but, I personally think this is something that's important enough for my country that I'd be willing to go to prison for it, certainly. But considering the timetable that's set out in this actual, sort of stop Brexit deal, or bill that was passed by the Parliament, I'm not so sure that even if Boris completely shrugged off the law and said, I don't care, I don't know if he could still get Brexit through, because the law says that Boris has to seek an extension if he doesn't have a deal by October 19th. And so if on October 19th, Boris doesn't have a deal, 1, and 2, he says, I'm not going to seek an extension, well, then they can throw him in prison right then and there. And they'll have a few days together to try and put in some new prime minister who will seek a Brexit extension. Now, the only way around this that I see that could help Boris stall is if he acts like he's trying to get an extension. But in reality, was only bluffing. This is a dangerous strategy, however, because, what if the EU is just very agreeable and they end up just giving him the extension the first time he asks without giving him any trouble, which I could certainly see them doing if they think that Boris really doesn't want the extension. If that's the case, then they're going to give it to him, and then he'll be kind of stuck, and he'll have to delay Brexit really indefinitely. But if the EU really wants to put, Britain through the ringer and give them a tough time, because of course the EU thinks that without them that Britain is nothing. If they, and I think the EU people truly do believe that. And if they do, they will actually try and make Britain leave without a deal. In which case they may actually help Boris stall long enough and, play a part together like they're trying to come up with some kind of extension deal and that ultimately will fail and will result in Brexit on October the 31st. And then, of course, Boris, well, who knows? If Boris tries to get the extension deal and fails, I don't think they can put him in prison. So that might be it right there. But again, that would take cooperation really between the government of the UK and the European Union. And I don't see that to be particularly likely. But whatever Mr. Cummings' plan is, I hope that we'll probably learn what that is sometime before the night of October the 31st. And, at that time, I will certainly cover that as well. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.